My name is Margalith Clarenberg. My mother came from Strasbourg and was brought up German and French. My father, I'm from the Rothschild family, and my father was the great-grandson of Maximilian of Rothschild. He married my mother in in the 20s. And he had a factory in the town of Solingen in Germany, but they went to live in the Netherlands because my father was born on the border between Holland and Germany. My father went generally during the week to Germany, to Solingen, and came the weekend home. We had a lovely house close to the sea, and I'm brought up actually quite luxuriously. There was never a money problem. I had friends, but I would say my early youth was already under the stamp of Nazism. You heard everyday stories. People read the papers. People were scared. To come to the war, I was in 4th or 5th grade in grade school. I had a test. I had a geography test, and I'd put my alarm clock for whatever, 6 o'clock the next morning, because I hadn't done any work. I woke up, my parents were both in my bedroom, and I had a balcony. I was at the front of the house, my room, balcony and a window. And my parents were looking out, and I woke up, and my mother or my father said, "These are German planes. I'm afraid there's an invasion." And so I went up and looked also at the planes, and then I said to my mother, the most important question, do I have to go to school? And she said no. And I was so glad that there's war, I didn't have to go to school, I didn't have to do this test. And then after 5 days, the Dutch gave up. The laws against Jews started very slowly in the Netherlands. I would say, about half a year later. The first things I really don't even remember, but I do remember, for instance, quite in the beginning, that you couldn't sit on benches in parks being Jewish. It was a law. Slowly they started with laws like Jews can only buy at between 12 and 1. No, it was late in the day, between 4 and 5. Jews have to be inside at 8 o'clock in the evening. And then they say Jews have to wear a star. This feeling of degrading is horrible. In Utrecht, I couldn't go to school anymore. And my mother started to teach me. I don't know where she got books, but she got books, and we did all the things that you do in junior high. Then really it started. There was, for instance, there came an order that Jews couldn't use transportation. We had a car, and the Germans had taken our car. We got a notice, my mother, that she had to go to Poland, to work camp. They called it work camps. And there were big discussions in my family, because she said, if they say that I have to go to work, there's nothing against working. That's the law. Let's do it. Now, I was a teenager, and I said, I'm not going, because I, again, was under the age and had to go with my mother. And the family says, what do you mean you're not going? Are you scared of work? No, I don't want. And what I remember that I said, I don't want a fence around me, but I really meant what I didn't realize then is somebody who's telling me what to do. And it saved our life, really. What happened then is, a friend of the family, he was a physician, he was a surgeon, and he told me how to have an appendicitis. And I went to another surgeon, and he told me exactly what to say. And I got admitted at the hospital. They cut me open and saw that I was healthy, took the appendix out, and then they put me on a bed high up. I was for 3 weeks in the hospital. This surgeon who did this was very angry. And he said to my mother, do you know they can close my hospital for that, if they find this out. But meanwhile, it was past the date that she had to go to Poland. We got a second letter to go to Poland in March or April. When we got the second letter to go, and I told my parents again that I didn't want to go, my parents said, okay, try to find a place to hide. If you can find something, and we don't know how to do it. And there was a problem also. Don't forget, financially, there was no income anymore for years already. And literally, you have your money in a shoebox under the bed. And when the money is gone, what are you going to do? And that's scary. For me, it was not because, oh, you're young and you think it will. But for my parents, yes, there was a responsibility involved. And I remember that my parents, my mother probably, my father was not that passive, but in handling things, my mother was the one, said, why don't we find something for you in hiding that's much easier? And we go, and then you at least have enough money. And I somewhere tried to talk them into it, and they said, okay, if you find a place where we can hide. And I remember I walked because you couldn't bike anymore. As a Jew, you didn't have a bike. There was no transportation that we could use. So I walked, and people told me, go, and these people probably will help, or these people. And for several days, and I couldn't find anything. My mother had an uncle and aunt who lived in The Hague also, in a boarding house. The owner of the boarding house was a Mrs. Gamble. Mrs. Gamble was married to Mr. Gamble, who was English, and her husband was in a concentration camp. The Germans had picked up. She had also a son, and the son was also in the camp for English people, and Mrs. Gamble helped us. Mrs. Gamble came and she said, I will help you to hide. And we went to her house, and she said, don't bring anything. Or they picked up probably a suitcase. But we all the time in the war, you leave everything behind. I mean, what you wear, it's about it. And a few things. I had a small suitcase somewhere, and that I got lost somewhere too, but anyway. And so we came, and we couldn't come together at the same time. It was all organized, and we there. And I remember that she took scissors, and she cut off the Jewish star from my father's coat. My father said, what are you doing? And she said, it's okay. For the time being, you can stay here. She had not told us this before. But I can't keep you all three. But I will find a place for Margalith or whatever. I don't remember how to come. But so that's the beginning of our hiding. Ines found a home for me, but the people had a boarding house, and you couldn't find help for housework, so they wanted somebody. And I was meanwhile 15, 16 probably, getting on 16, somewhere in that neighborhood, and I could do the housework. But main thing was they wanted me to do the kitchen work, because in the boarding house, I forgot how many boarders they had, but the people ate that too. So in that time, the Dutch eat potatoes a lot, like I told you, and they're peeled, so we got pails of potatoes. I can peel potatoes very fast. And fish, you could get fish still. But anyway, the people, I had some bad experiences there. I was there only for probably half a year. I didn't want to complain. And I slept in the kitchen. There was a little room off the kitchen, and I put a bunk bed there, and that's where I slept. And I really started at 6 in the morning and worked till quite late. The story is kind of a sad story. I told you about an uncle and an aunt I had where we came through. They went also into hiding. We lost somewhere towards the end. We didn't know, because we didn't live in the same town anymore. And the people were in the house I lived didn't want me to meet people, the boarders in the house. So they had a daughter, and the daughter brought the food up to the people on trays. One day, a tray came back with a tea caddy. The Dutch have special tea caddies. And I had embroidered that for my aunt. And I recognized that tea caddy. Of course I recognized it. And accidentally, because they didn't know I was there. I mean, I didn't come out of my kitchen. And I knew that they had to be there. And I remember I went up, they had a room in the attic. It was a big house. 4 levels, I forgot. 4 levels. But they were on the 3rd level. And I did hide to see if somebody would come out of the room, because the restroom was across the hall. And I don't remember I did it once or more. My uncle came out of there, and it was my uncle. And we started crying and went into the room, and we kissed each other and cried. And the lady of the house heard it. I don't know how she knew about it. And she came upstairs and she hit my aunt. She thought that they had done it. And I never forget this. My aunt she was really a real lady, like elegant lady. And I remember that this was, it went through me. Now when I'm talking about it, I still get goosebumps. Because it was so degrading again. So, it's a sad story to finish this. I got the flu, and I felt miserable. And this lady who has helped us came every so often, once a month or so, I don't remember the time, to see how everything was okay, and brought my coupons, because the underground gave coupons also to these people for my food. And found me sick. I was miserable. I had the flu and I felt so sick. And she said to me, "Can you sit on the back of my bike?" You know, everybody in Holland bike rides. And she said, "Why?" I said, "Why?" And she said, "Oh, I want to take you home for the time being, until you're better." So I went with her to her house. That was the 1st of April, 1944. The 3rd of April, the Germans came and picked up my uncle and aunt. So I never went back. And I told you I lost my clothes somewhere on the road. That was where I lost, because that was it. And then they found for me in other place. So there is a special school along one of the rivers. The head of the school lived in a house right next to the school. And he had a wife who was sickly, had 3 sons, and adopted a little girl, 4-year-old girl. I needed some help in the household. And I went to these people, lovely people. Stayed there for, I don't remember, I would say a year, 8 months, a year. I had some problems there. So the big building was empty, the school building. And the German Air Force, Luftwaffe, went into this building. And I saw them, of course, all the time. It was the same ground. And, okay, I speak German, of course. And somewhere I talked to them, kind of doing normal, because officially I was not Jewish. And if I would have run away from them, it would not have been normal. And one day, the man where I was in hiding came to me, and he had a leather bag. And he said, "Do you know the bag?" And my heart stopped beating, because this was my father's attaché case. I told him, "Yes, it's my father's." And then he said to me, "Okay, there is a man here, and he says that he knows where your parents are. And he wants to bring you, because your mother's birthday is next week, as a surprise. She doesn't know it. We would like to bring you. Your father told us this." Now, Officially, my parents didn't know where I was. They were not in the house of this English-Dutch woman anymore. And they found another place outside of this town, in a house of a man who worked in a factory. He had a little piece of land there, and he was a factory worker, wife and 2 small children. And my parents could stay there. I was first a little bit scared, but still he knew the birthday of my mother, and the people in the house said there was no problem, and I should go. And he indeed brought me to my parents, who were in his house. He was the man who did hide my parents. And of course we hadn't seen each other for a year and a half, and it was very emotional. And I told them everything, and I told them also, my parents, about the German Luftwaffe, who was there, the Air Force. I left again and went back. About 3-4 weeks later, the man came again and asked, I could get another weekend to my parents. And the people said, sure. I went with him to my parents, and my mother said, or my father, you stay here, you don't go back. Because we have talked to the underground. It's much too dangerous to be there with all the Germans. And you can stay here. The people here will take you, and the underground will take care of coupons. He built for us, there's a marsh, all this is marshland, but he lived on a dike. And he built for us a little road to in the middle of the marsh where trees were, and he built a little hut. But the hut was really only a bed with straw. We had mice there, not rats. I remember mice were looking at you, and I'm never scared of mice anymore, or rats. And we slept in that because it was more secure than stay in the house. My father fell and broke his leg. And the custom over there was that every Tuesday and Friday the doctor had still a car, drove over the dike, because they lived on the dike. And if you wanted the doctor, you put a white piece of cotton on your doorpost or in the gate, and then the doctor stopped and came. So that's what I did with my father to set his leg. And I'm sure that lots of neighbors knew about this, because people live so close together that. But everybody was so against the Germans that. This went okay till the day before Christmas. There was really no food anymore. Now the Germans had taken away basically all the food. And I remember that the woman said to us, and that was, like I said, the day before Christmas, people, I'm very sorry, but I have 2 children, and we don't have much food anymore. I would like you to find something else. Of course you can stay till after Christmas, but that's the way it is. This is already what we call the hunger winter. I knew a woman who said to me that she knew somebody in the town of Utrecht. You remember that town? That's only 10, 12 miles away. She knew somebody who was a black marketeer, and he had a little shed in the marsh. And she said she would go with me to see how we could get that shed to live for us, because there was no underground anymore. I mean, we were lost. And we understood that what the woman said where we were in the house. I mean, her children came first. There was no question about it. I went with this woman to these people, and I said it was like it's not for me, it was for a Jewish family for 1 week, what would be okay. And the man gave us a key. The hut was, I would say, about 6 by 8 feet, excuse me, not yard. Dirt floor, Now it was in the middle of the winter, and there was a little, in front, a little part of it that had built on that looked like a tent, but it was made of plywood. And there was one of these little ovens that he sold, actually. He made the money with this. You can put in anything you want, it burns, and then it heats. Now, we didn't have anything. We had a bag with 25 pounds of beans. And we did hang this on the wall. And we got from the woman who went with me an iron pot. And they had used this for pig food. So I remember my father cleaned it, because there was water, but it was all ice. On the 1st of January, we went into the little hut. There was no toilet. So we made out of a box. It was not even wood. He cut something up, and there was a pail. And we put the pail underneath, and we used it behind. And we had a bathroom that way. My mother and I went to steal wood. Now, we couldn't burn or cook in daytime, because then they would see from the dike that there was somebody living. So we only cooked at night. There was no bed, but we had a mattress. The mattress was standing at the wall and was wet. And there was a sofa and one chair, I think. And what we did is we took the mattress and we slept so that your legs came out under the mattress, but so all three of us could sleep, because the sofa was so wet that it had to dry up. There was snow outside. When we came, there was ice, actually. And in daytime, we didn't have any heat, because we couldn't turn this little oven on. And we also stole, how do you call it? It's a vegetable. It's a relative of a cabbage. It's around
Brussels sprouts?
Is it Brussels sprouts? Yeah. There were Brussels sprouts, and I remember they were all frozen. And there are lots of them on a stick, and I remember us stealing them. And the big, how you call it, turnips. What you do is you let them boil, and it comes in sweet syrupy after I don't know how many hours. So we had that, and then we had 25 beans a person a day. And that was our food. In April, end of March, an old man came to us, and he was a fisherman. He was in his 80s, and he came and he said, "People, you have to get out of here." And we said, "Why?" But he said the Germans broke the dikes, and everything will be underwater. And we don't know how high the water will get. So you can't stay here because you will drown. But you can stay. I have a shed, and I have 2 goats, and they will be on the attic because my shed will be underwater too. But if you don't mind, you can stay with the goats up on the shed. So we said, yeah, we love to. And we are now in May 1945, the day of the liberation. My father had been in the First World War. I have to tell you this to explain this. The liberation officially was not signed. I think it's signed on the 8th of May. And this was the 6th of May, or 7th of May. It was already, but it was not signed yet. And some people from the underground came from the town of Utrecht. And we had soldiers in the little village, or there were soldiers. And the people where we had been, you know, this fisherman, where we were on the attic, there was somebody else living very close by, and right actually the same, there were some houses standing together. And he was the head of the underground, because they had the new underground formed, and there were some people coming from, and they took the weapons away from the Germans. They had 72 Germans, I remember the figure. And I remember my father saying to this man, don't do this. Soldiers don't want to give their weapons to people who are not soldiers. They feel that that's their dignity and things. But everybody was so it was so wonderful, and then you can do it, and then at last. And so they did it. They came with 3 tanks from a bigger town and started shooting in the village and killed a substantial amount of people. The day, that was the last day, one or two, I think the day before the official liberation. On the 8th of May, I know that day because it's my birthday, so I quite a lot of remembrance. I had a pair of shoes that I was wearing. You remember that I was at the house of the principal of the Bach children, and I had a pair of shoes. When I came out to stay over there, I did wear wooden shoes and saved this for liberation. And yes, my father had a package of Camel cigarettes he saved for liberation. When he opened, they were all green and completely gone, but okay. But my shoes, that was the day. We decided we walked to the town of Utrecht, which is about 7 miles. I put my shoes on. Hey, they were too small. My feet had grown. I couldn't. I went on wooden shoes to Utrecht. The town of Utrecht was exciting. We got liberated by the Polish army. And what the Dutch did right away, and I've seen it, the Dutch girls, there were lots of Dutch girls who dated German soldiers. For whatever reason. They got food, got pregnant also, liked to have sex or boyfriends or whatever. And the Dutch hated them, of course. So what did the Dutch do? They put them in the streets and they shaved their heads that day of liberation. And I remember, I think I have a big shaving somewhere from it. And then for weeks you saw girls with something around their head, and you knew, hey, that's one of the girls. The town, everybody was dancing. I saw colons with Germans without weapons who had their hands over their head. I have seen, of course, everybody went, the soldiers that liberated, people went to them, kissed them, and somewhere, we talked earlier about this, you think, okay, now it is over. It was not over. It really, because there are no connection points anymore for life. A few days later, say something, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, my mother and I hitchhiked to The Hague. There was no transportation. You can't imagine how empty and how a country looks after something like this. There's nothing. The streets are broken because they're, of course, not done for plus the heavy trucks on it and tanks, and people are sick, people are all thin. It is a very strange experience. We went to The Hague. We didn't know that our house was bombed. We go and we nearly couldn't find our own house. There was still one wall standing, and of course the people had stolen and so on. But we found, and I still have it, about this big. My mother had a silver bread basket, and she recognized that she had the silver work. It looked black, so nobody picked it up. That's all that we have left over. The woman next door, there was a sign that they lived now at another address. That's the way people did this. And we went to her because they had quite a lot of stuff from us before we went away out of The Hague. And meanwhile, her husband had died, and she said, oh, come and stay with us and sleep, but I don't have any of your stuff. And I remember that we were sleeping in sheets, and the sheets had the initials of my mother embroidered in it. So, but we decided not to talk about it and let it go. We went back, because there was nothing in The Hague, and we went back to Utrecht, and we got a house from a Nazi, a Dutchman who was Nazi, and who was in jail meanwhile. And that's where we stayed the first, quite some time actually, several years, till we could buy our own house.